So I had it rough. My mom had a drug addiction, and I was the oldest child. So I was responsible for a lot of things and situations. A lot of things happened, but I tried to have a good perspective, a positive outlook. And I always said, I remember when I was 9, I had a teacher that told me, "You're so smart. You can do very well. You'll do very well and go to college. If you go to college, you'll get out of the hood per se." Because I'm from Newark, New Jersey, and so we call it the hood. And that stuck with me. The reason I made it out of high school was because of my guidance counselor. She encouraged me to use my voice because so many years I was taught I didn't have a voice and that my voice did not matter. So when I was in high school, no one even knew that I was in foster care. I didn't tell my best friend. I didn't tell anyone. No one knew anything about my home life because I was ashamed.
Welcome to the Onward Podcast. This is Emily Harmon, your host. Each week, I publish an interview with one of my guests where we talk about facing adversity, moving forward, and discovering ourselves along the way. And this interview with Aisya Carroll is just that. Aisya is the CEO of Survivor Not by Chance, LLC. She has a bachelor's degree in business administration from the New Jersey Institute of Technology, and she's a certified life coach, motivational speaker, author, mentor, advocate for childhood trauma, and consultant. Aisya has mentored teenagers and young adults for over 15 years, and she's created programs for young children to help them cope with trauma. She speaks at schools and community events to bring inspiration. Listen to this interview and hear Aisya's story and learn how she turned her pain into a passion to help others. We talk about her book, The Pressures of Becoming a Diamond, and we talk about how she named her company and why she named her company Survivor Not by Chance. We are live. Hi, Aisya. Welcome to the Onward Podcast.
Thank you so much, Emily, for having me here today.
Yeah, I've been looking forward to this interview. Just reading your story, you've got your book is The Pressures of Becoming a Diamond. You want to hold it up? Yeah. And when you signed up to be a guest on the Onward Podcast, and I just looked through what you wrote and everything that you've been through in your life, and the name of your company, Survivor Not by Chance, LLC. And I just thought, I have got to talk to this woman. I'm so excited to talk to her and hear her story. I love hearing everybody's story. Everyone's story is unique, but I am just so thankful that you're telling your story. And when I looked at your book and it said, you're telling your story because you felt alone during what you went through, and you want people to not feel alone. And that's part of the reason I started the Onward movement, is because people shouldn't feel alone. Whatever we've been through, we're going through, somebody else has been through it before and they've made it. And by sharing your story, you are letting people know that they can make it too.
Absolutely.
So could you tell us your story?
Sure. So I don't have an orthodox upbringing. I was partially raised by my mom. She had me when she was 15 years old. She got pregnant with me she had me at 16. She got pregnant with me when she was 15. She dropped out of high school.
Wow.
She had some traumas from some things that happened to her when she was a child. And when I was 30 years old, my mom, her and I were having a discussion, and I asked her something about my father. He has not really been present. My biological father wasn't present. And so I asked her something about my father, and she told me I know what it was. She said, "I don't understand why your father denies you." Because my father would say I wasn't his child, even though I look exactly like him. And so she said, "I don't know why he keeps denying you, because he knows what he did." And I'm like, well, what do you mean by that? And I just wanted to understand specifically what she was referring to. And so she told me basically the story, and he made sure I was here. He forced himself on her and created me. So at that moment, it was like I had a whole new respect for my mother. because I could not imagine raising a child that I know the person did something to me and that child was here as a result.
And she was a child when she had you.
Yes, she was.
Wow.
So then that reminded me of some scenarios where I would hear my mother say, "Oh, you look just like your father." And I didn't understand why she said it the way she did, because it wasn't like, "Baby, you look like your father."
Yeah.
It was, "You look like your father." And so from there, it made me appreciate her even more. So we had some rough times growing up. We were homeless quite a few times. We didn't have electricity. Sometimes we didn't have food. It was tough. And then my mom, by the time she was 17, she had 2 children. And so she couldn't really find a job. She was a child herself and she didn't have the proper upbringing for herself. So my grandfather wasn't around and there was some secrets in regards to that. And so my mom was wounded in
Yeah.
so many different ways.
Well, I admire you for taking a look at that. A lot of times there are people who will just blame their parents for their situation without taking responsibility for some of it. And also without understanding what their parents went through and that their parents are human as well. And so I commend you for that. Did you ever meet your father?
Yes, I know who my father is. Well, let me back up a bit. Initially, I did take that approach. Initially, I did blame my mother for everything because I didn't know her whole story. Once I became an adult and I had my own children, I started to soften up a little bit. And then when I found out my dad raped her and made me, that automatically, like, it's just like, oh, my mom, like, I love her because she loved me that much, even though she couldn't show me the way she wanted to.
Yes.
She loved me so much that she made sure I was here.
Right.
She knew the pregnancy. So just gave me a whole new light. My father, I don't communicate with him at all. We have no communication because of me. I choose not to. He is not a person I feel anyone should be involved with because he's very narcissistic. And that's not an energy I like to have in my atmosphere. So I had it rough. My mom had a drug addiction and I was the oldest child. So I was responsible for a lot of things and situations. A lot of things happened, but I tried to have a good perspective, a positive outlook. And I always said, I remember when I was 9, I had a teacher that told me, "You're so smart. You can do very well. You'll do very well and go to college. If you go to college, you'll get out of the hood per se," because I'm from Newark, New Jersey. And so we call it the hood. And that stuck with me.
Well, I interviewed somebody last week too who had a really tough childhood, and she was mentioning a teacher that said something to her, and you have the same thing. And so, just teachers play such an important role in kids' lives.
Absolutely, absolutely. I remember my first day of kindergarten. I didn't start kindergarten until I was 6 years old. Because we moved around so much, we were always homeless, and my mother never registered me for school. So my youngest sister, her grandmother registered me for school. And my first day of school, we had half day because we always did. And this little girl said to me, I didn't know how to write my name. I didn't know colors. I didn't remember anything. So the teacher was like, "Draw a picture." And I'm like, okay. So I did the best I could. And this one little girl said to me, "That's horrible. Why would you draw anything? Like, that's disgusting." Like, I still remember this. And the teacher was amazing. She said, "Aisha, don't worry about her. She stayed back. This is her second time in kindergarten. She don't know what she talking about." So that actually, like, teachers are important.
Yes.
Teachers are very important. And so I honor teachers. I respect them, especially the ones that are doing everything they can to help our children, our babies. So teachers are very important in our lives. Even when I was in high school, the reason I made it out of high school was because of my guidance counselor.
Wow.
She encouraged me to use my voice because so many years I was taught I didn't have a voice. and that my voice did not matter. So when I was in high school, no one even knew that I was in foster care. I didn't tell my best friend. I didn't tell anyone. No one knew anything about my home life because I was ashamed. And my guidance counselor, her and I are Facebook friends now.
Oh,
And
I was going to say, are you in touch
she's
with?
awesome. I love her so much. She supports everything I do. And so she told me, Aisha, tell your story. I was like, no, I'm scared because people are not going to look at me, a certain way. I don't want to be judged. She said, don't worry about judgment because judgment's always going to be there.
We're always judged.
And so from there, I started applying for scholarships. And I don't want to give too much away because a lot of it's in the book.
A lot of it's in the book, yeah. Well, one of the things you talk about in the book is a time when you were visiting a friend and your friend's mom wanted to take you home, right? And you had to call home to find out when your mom would be there. But you kind of knew your mom she was doing crack, right? And
Yeah.
just the pressure of that on a child, and then the mother drove you home and there were drug dealers outside, and she's like, were you able to continue to play with that friend?
So I don't want to give too much away.
Okay.
But you'll see how, if you purchase the book, you'll see how the story unfolds. It unfolds in a way that you probably would not expect. I should say that. I will also say that a lot of things that's happened in my life, I had to change some of the scenarios around just to protect myself because a lot of people are still alive.
Yeah.
But for the most part, everything that in that book has happened exactly that way, but in different moments.
Okay. And so how did your mom feel about the book?
She is so proud of me.
Oh,
She is so proud of me. She tells everybody.
that's awesome.
Yeah, she is super proud. Before I wrote the book, I had a conversation with my mother and, I wanted her permission and to know that she was okay. She's tell your story, baby. It happened. And she's not ashamed. She's actually in the process of working on some things for herself.
Oh, good.
So I'm proud of that.
Good. I mean, drug addiction is an illness.
Yes.
And I mean, my son is an alcoholic and is 4.5 years sober, but so I understand. And I've worked with a lot of parents whose children, and I've interviewed some of them whose children have passed away from a heroin overdose. And I know the shame that goes along with it. So I'm proud of your mom and for you for speaking out, and not being ashamed of it, because it is what happened and it is the way it is. And her body reacts differently to drugs maybe than somebody else. And she had circumstances in her life, but she owns it and she's not letting it hold her back from what she wants to accomplish next.
No, not at all. And I'm proud. I'm super proud of my mother. She has an amazing relationship with my children. They love their Nana. Oh my goodness.
Do you guys live near each other?
We used to, but now she lives in Georgia and I'm in New Jersey.
Okay.
But, we FaceTime and we talk. She'll come visit, but COVID right now, so we're trying to be safe.
Right. So after high school, you went to college.
Yes.
And why don't you talk about that? And then just talk about that. And then how does a little girl who's been through everything that you've been through end up going to college and end up being such a good mom and end up writing a book?
Thank you.
It doesn't happen for everybody.
It doesn't. It takes a lot of work.
Yeah. So I want you to talk about the work because I want you to be proud of it.
Sure.
I know you are.
Thank you. Sure. So it was hard. I struggled with depression as a teenager and into my early adulthood as well. I struggled with depression off and on because of my experiences. And also the reason I struggled with it was because I never dealt with the trauma. And I didn't realize I was as traumatized as I was because I normalized everything that happened in my life. I also compared relationships from what I saw to my experiences. I watched a lot of domestic violence growing up, hardcore, really bad stuff. And I thought that's what domestic violence was. And I did not know it can be emotional or verbal because I was only taught about the physical aspects of it. Mm-hmm. And so I became a part of that toxicity because it was a part of my environment. So when I went to college, I was in for culture shock. This was the first time I was around people from different countries, different cultures, different languages. This was also the first time in my life where I was by myself and I didn't have to be controlled by any individual person and I didn't have to follow anyone's rules. And so initially, it was very emotionally hard for me because I knew I only had myself. And at this time, my biological mother and I were not talking.
Okay.
But like God always sent someone there for me to like mother me in a way. My guidance counselor was the mother for me when I was in high school. And then I had one scholarship I received. And this woman, absolutely phenomenal woman, her name is Miss Cecile, and she mothered me through college.
Oh, wow. How'd you meet her?
She was the scholarship foundation liaison. I think she was the director, but she would do on-site visits with all the recipients.
Okay.
She would put me in my place when I needed it.
Where'd you go to college?
I went to NJIT, New Jersey Institute of Technology.
Okay.
Tough school.
Yeah.
Tough school, but I'm grateful I made it out of there. But she would have lunch with us and she would talk with us. We would talk about relationships and she'd be like, he not for you. She was super sweet and she helped me get through. And, once I finished college, even like in high school, in college, I was always like a mentor to young girls. And so people would sign me up for like the Big Sister program. And so I would at 16, I would mentor 9 and 10-year-old girls that were aspiring to be good students in the church. And then from there, when I was in college, I was a part of a program where they had freshmen come in and I would mentor the freshmen that came in and let them come with me and shadow me. I won an award for the Female Leadership Award in college for the year, but I was still hurt inside.
I was going to say, when did you deal with the trauma?
So I started dealing with the trauma after I had my children. I didn't know the trauma existed and it was showing up in my relationships. So I've had relationships in the past and people always assume it's the man or it's the opposite party or partner. I own the parts in the relationship that I was toxic with because I didn't deal with the trauma. I didn't deal with the hurt. I didn't deal with the abandonment. I did not deal with not having peace. Once I realized, I didn't know that I was dealing with it until I ended my relationship because I put everything on him opposed to me taking ownership. And so once the relationship ended, after some time, I started to dig deep inside myself. And I started to see that I had areas of myself that I needed to work on. And I couldn't be the best mother. I couldn't be the best version of myself or partner for anyone if I did not heal.
So did you do that with the counselor or did you do this with just by yourself realizing this?
So all these years I've gone to counseling off and on.
Yeah. Okay.
Counseling helps for some people and depends on what type of counseling you go to.
And just finding the right counselor is always hard.
Right.
It's got to be someone you connect with.
Exactly. Yeah. And I absolutely agree with counseling. I absolutely agree with someone going to get help.
Yeah.
I'm actually a certified life coach. I wanted to go and get my licensure, but I decided not to because as a certified life coach, I can share my experiences with my clients. If I'm licensed through the state, I'm not allowed to share my experiences.
Oh, wow. Yeah. I think sharing your experiences, like you with writing your book, you are not alone. Sharing your experiences helps others relate.
Right.
Very interesting.
Exactly. And so that's the reason I decided to take this course opposed to the other route, because I love the holistic approach with healing. And, I did a lot of counseling over the years, but when I learned how to holistically heal myself, that's when everything started to open up for me. My love was different. The way I gave it to people, my patience, I have more patience. I have more tolerance. Before I wasn't as tolerant.
Yeah.
I didn't have as much patience. And so now I own who I am. And I own who I am so much to where I allow my daughter to correct me. My daughter, she's 14.
Okay.
And so my daughter will say, well, mommy, no, I don't think it should be that way. You shouldn't look at it from this perspective. Try looking at it from that perspective. And I can say some years ago, I wouldn't have taken it that way.
Yeah.
But we can learn from everyone. There's no person that we can't learn from.
Wow. Deb she said when you were talking about how you helped out all those different people when you were in college, always a leader. It's good to give back. I think when we give back and when we share our story and when we help others, we also help ourselves.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Because I felt good when I helped people. And that's why I continue to do it, because it gave me something to look forward to.
Right. Right.
And I'm just grateful that I've been able to do that. I've been able to give of myself despite my hurt. And some people can't do that. Some people turn cold and some people aren't able to open themselves up.
Do you know why you were able to open up?
Well, it's my calling. I know that without a doubt, it's a part of my destiny.
Yeah. Yeah. What would you tell your younger self?
I would tell my younger self to love her, to give the love to her that she gives to everyone else.
And what about your brother? You have a younger brother? Is that what you said?
So I have 5 siblings. Actually, I have 7 siblings. Sorry.
Yeah.
So I have brothers and sisters.
Wow.
And I'm the oldest out of all of them.
Yeah. Wow. And you have a daughter and a son now?
Yes.
And Deb says too. Thank you, Deb, for watching.
Oh, thank you so much, Deb. I appreciate you.
It does. So when did you start becoming a coach?
I became a certified life coach 2 years ago, but I've been mentoring since I was 16 years old and I'm 37 now. So that's a couple of years.
Yeah. Your specialty is helping people through trauma?
Yes. So I specialize with helping individuals heal from trauma. And I've created a method that I know works because I used it on myself. And not only that, but it's helped for all of my clients.
Awesome.
As long as the clients decide to dedicate themselves to the work, because I do not make it easy, I make sure that they're feeling the healing process. Because if you don't feel it, you're not really healing. Healing, you feel.
Yeah. And it kind of gets messy before it gets better, right?
Absolutely.
I say that because
it's so funny you say that, because every single one of my clients, I tell them, this is not going to be easy and it's going to get worse before it gets better. And in order for you to get better, you have to feel that pain. You're going to be triggered way more than you were in the past. I also help students. And so I have a program that I created called Encouraging Young Champions. That program is geared towards teaching students social and emotional wellness. And so I use meditation, positive affirmations, and my story, as well as some other creative things that I've come up with to help these students heal, teach them how to deal with trauma when it does come, because every person has dealt with trauma at least one time in their life. We just don't think that it is. And so preparing them to emotionally learn how to cope independently is essential, because there are going to be times where their parents are not going to be there to help them cope. And so I use these tools and my story to help them understand. And I've been able to relate to these students in so many different ways to where I'm like, oh my goodness, I'm shocked.
Well, I mean, I can relate to what you're saying about how sometimes we don't really know how the trauma has impacted us. I mean, here's just one example. I was married to a verbally abusive person, and probably 20 years later, I was with my boyfriend after I'd gotten a divorce. I was with my boyfriend and he was backing up the camper and I was having to steer him on how to, where directing him to back it up. And it gets confusing when you back something up, it's stressful and the dogs are barking. And I just broke down, panicked. He's like, Emily, I'm not the person's name. I'm not that person. But it was 20 years later because I was waiting to be snapped at and it wasn't even my fault. And so that just tells you that that trauma is in you and you never know when it could be triggered, and it can, even though you thought you've dealt with it, it can still come back. It's
Yes.
just different situations like that.
Yes.
That's just one example. I mean, probably not what you've been through, but verbal abuse is tough because nobody can look at you and see any bruises.
Exactly. And what I always tell people is that every person experience is different. Every person is different. And so as a society, we normalize where we are basically stating my trauma is not this person's trauma. So it's not trauma, but that's not the case. What happened to you is your experience and it's valid. And so we as a community, we need to learn to stop diminishing people's experiences because that causes anxiety and depression.
Yeah.
It happens in families a lot. It happened to me often when I was a child where I felt unloved. I didn't love myself. I felt I wasn't worth certain things because of the way I was spoken to. And so I feel people need to learn to be very careful with their words and how they speak to people, because that determines how someone's outcome can be. I'm very careful with my words. I make practice to explain to my children there's life and death in your words. And when you speak your words to individuals, be sure that what you're saying is lifting them up and not bringing them down.
That's really good advice. That's really good advice. I can tell you're a good mom.
Thank you.
You're a conscious parent. I should put you in touch with, we're going to forget his name right now. I was just on his podcast and he was on mine. It's been a long day. I'm going to forget.
It's okay. No worries.
But it's, his podcast is about conscious parenting. I'll put you in touch with him and maybe you be a guest on his. It's
thank you so much. I appreciate it.
It's about parenting.
Yeah, I think a lot of people do not understand that parenting is a huge responsibility.
Yeah. Where do we get taught how to be a parent? By our parents.
Right. And so for me, initially, I was a completely different parent than I am today. And I have conversations with my 14-year-old daughter where she'll say, Mommy, I'm proud of you because I see how you've grown. And I see how you are now as a parent compared to how you were when I was younger. Now, I'm not saying that I was a bad parent. It's just that I learned to release control. Because as parents, we feel we should control everything when it comes to our children, you know, because that's how I was raised. I didn't know anything different.
Yeah. And then you go to college and you're free.
Right.
That's not good.
And then children are people.
Yeah.
Children are people. They're just little people. And so they have ideas. They have minds. They have feelings and emotions. And it's our responsibility to help them cultivate their feelings, emotions, allow them to learn how to express themselves in a positive way. I love children. I love them. I adore them.
I was just visiting my grandson. He's 4.5. He always says, I have a good idea.
Oh, I love that.
I love that. It's such a positive thing. I have a good idea. Oh, I have a good idea. I'm like, Marshall, you always have a good idea. And then he got frustrated. And I don't think I was as good with my kids now about feelings. But I was just like, so what are you feeling? Feeling sad, help them understand what their feelings are because sometimes they don't know. I'm learning that now even just for myself after 38 years of working for the Navy and just partly the way I was raised. I mean, I couldn't name my feelings. I even got a book point back into my study that I think Brene Brown interviewed this author, and the book is called Permission to Feel, because a lot of people in the United States can't name their feelings outside of happy, sad, glad, whatever.
You're absolutely right about that. I know the United States is different than most countries. We're one of the countries where we literally suppress all of our emotions except for happiness or sadness. And those two are the extreme emotions. When you're happy, it's hard not to show you're happy. When you're sad, really sad, it's hard not to show you're really sad. But we have emotions in between those aspects of our lives. How do we change or show those emotions to our partners? How do we understand when we have these emotions, how to react in moments? And so when I have clients and they have questions about stories of their lives, I always try to start with childhood, because with childhood, there's a lot of things that allowed us to become who we are. And sometimes we have to change that paradigm of our perspective in order for us to see clearly, to take accountability for where we are in our lives.
Well, I like that point about like taking accountability, because it's really easy to point the finger at somebody else. And at some point, we're an adult and we're responsible. And one of my coaches said, whenever you point a finger at somebody, you've got three fingers pointing back at you. So let's take a look at what I can change, because it's a lot easier for me to change me or to be more aware of myself than to demand other people change.
Exactly.
And it's really hard to take a look at yourself and figure out what needs to change. And that's the messy part of what
absolutely
you're talking about.
And that's why when I do coach my clients, I let them know this is not going to be I'm going to yes you or tell you what things to make you smile and happy. When you are healing, it's going to be rough. Some days you may not like me. Some days you may love me.
So why would someone want to go through that, all that self-awareness and stuff? Why not just keep going down current path?
So you can continue down a current path and not be your true authentic self and not live and be the best version of yourself and have all of the freedom and happiness that you deserve. Or you take a rough journey for a small amount of time in your life and live the rest of your life to the fullest capacity. And a lot of people don't realize that when you hold on to trauma, you're holding on to pain in your body, literally. So your mind and your body are connected.
Yeah.
And seeing that your mind and your body are connected, a lot of people who deal with unresolved trauma, they have a lot of ailments, physical ailments. So it's something called the adverse childhood experience. And it's a study that has been in place for quite some time. It's called the ACE study. And this ACE study, they did this study to determine people who have more trauma and people who have less trauma. How does these people lives expectancies exist? It goes based on different things that happen to them. So primarily, if you have less trauma, you may live to 90.
Or if you dealt with that trauma, right?
Right. Mm-hmm. So when you do deal with the trauma, it actually helps increase. I can't say if it increases your life expectancy because I haven't seen the research for that just yet, but it does increase where you're full of life. You're not as down and depressed and gloomy. Yeah. Trauma affects your weight. Trauma affects your eating habits. Trauma affects your stressors and your stress level. Trauma affects blood pressure, cholesterol, diabetes. Like it affects so many people. Can have heart congestion, heart failure, just from having trauma in their bodies. And so they did these studies on a numerous of people. And it's proven that if you have these traumas and they're not resolved to some capacity, you're doing yourself a disservice. When I did my ACE study, because, it's a series of questions, they ask you 10 questions. You won't believe, well, you've read the book, so you probably will. But for the viewers, my ACE score was a 10 out of 10.
Whoa.
That's the worst score you can get. When I saw that, I was like, oh my goodness. And I really did not think that I've been through a lot because I compared my experiences to people I know experiences or to someone else's experiences that I've seen on TV. So I didn't think my experiences were that bad. I thought I was going to get maybe a 4.
Wow.
And I had a 10.
Wow. Well, because it became normalized, because you live with it day in and day out, you don't even know what's normal or not. Exactly.
And so that's why I feel it's my responsibility to educate the community about what narcissism is, the different levels of narcissistic abuse, the different forms of abuse that exist that we don't know of, because we deal with it every day, even in family relationships.
Yeah.
We deal with narcissistic parents sometimes, and we don't, like, you're taught, oh, you have to love your father, you have to love your mother, you have to love your siblings, you have to love your family. But we don't teach people how to have healthy boundaries.
Yeah. That's not really boundaries, relationship, that kind of stuff isn't taught in school. And if it's taught at home, it's taught by people who learned from somebody else, who learned from somebody else. And yeah.
And that's why I
If
created
we have trouble with relationships, it's not, I mean, maybe don't blame ourselves. I mean, but we can take responsibility from here on out if we're seeing we're having trouble.
Exactly. And then it's a lot of things that you can do. You can find some people work better in holistic environments. Some people work better where they can have experienced relations. So my clients reach out to me because of my experience and my exposure, as well as the results that I've been able to produce. So when you find a counselor, sometimes it's hard to relate. And from my experience, no disrespect to any person who's a licensed professional that counsels and guides, but from my experience, I could not connect with my counselors, and it felt like a chore. And so I like to build relationships with my clients where I have conversations with them throughout the week as well. In between the sessions, I'll reach out to them to check on them, make sure they're okay. They don't need me immediately. When you go to counseling, sometimes that's not an option.
Yeah. You're building trust.
Right.
Because you're talking about trauma, which takes trust to talk about. And I know somebody who is going to see a counselor to talk about something really, really traumatic. Mm-hmm. And right when she got to that point to say it, the counselor's phone rang and she picked up the phone. So, that you've got to have, in order to share such vulnerable stuff, you've got to have trust. You've got to feel like the person listening, and you got to feel like the person understands, not necessarily from a textbook, but from having been through it. Like you have, you really do understand.
Yes, I do.
So how do people, well, first off, let me put the name of your book up here again.
Sure. And I'll show you all.
Pressures of Becoming a Diamond.
The Pressures of Becoming a Diamond. My daughter drew this diamond for me.
Oh, well, I love it.
Yeah. I encourage you all. This book will change your perspective in regards to your own life. You may look at things in your own life and start to see parts of in this book in your life, and you may not even realize it. And it'll help you learn how to get through these challenges. Mm-hmm. We all have challenges in life. And I always say to any person who comes in contact with me, I survived not by chance, but I survived because I fought to survive. And we're all fighting to survive.
Yes. Thank you so much.
You're welcome. Thank you.
Aisya.
Yeah. So the book's on Amazon. You can just Google it or go to Amazon. It's there. You can go to my website, survivornotbychance.com. I'm on Instagram at Survivor Not By Chance and Facebook, Survivor Not By Chance.
And if somebody wanted to reach out to you, what's your email?
My email address is survivornotbychance@gmail.com.
At gmail.com. Yeah. How'd you come up with that name? I mean, I know, but I mean, like, was it hard to come up with that name, or was it just like?
So ironically, I came up with this name like 7 years ago.
Before you even started your company?
Before I started my business. Mm-hmm. I was changing my Instagram name. And when I changed it, I was like, what can I change it to? And I wanted to have something impactful. And I just said to myself, I survived not by chance. I survived because I fought to survive. And that's where Survivor Not By Chance came from, my Instagram.
Well, I'm glad you fought to survive so that you can help other people. And so Deb says, great session. Thanks for watching, Deb.
Thank you so much, Deb. Thank you so much.
You can help other people, and people can know that they're not alone. And I think also by reading your book, it helps people relate who didn't grow up the way you did to what it was like.
Yeah.
Helps us better understand, to know what it was like to grow up.
Yeah. And then not only that, but even if they did grow, some people grew up in 2-parent households and they see things in that house that are similar to my experiences. And they may not know it's trauma.
Yeah. You just think it's normal.
Yep. So it's not just for people who've experienced trauma. The book is for any person. Any person can relate to a lot of the things in that book. You just won't be able to know until you read it. So catch me on Amazon.
I think Aisha wants us to read her book. Yeah, it's really good. All right. Thank you so much. Stay on. We'll just end the live. We
Thank
stay
you
on
so much. I really appreciate you.
Aisha, thank you for sharing your story with the Onward podcast audience. And thank you for being an advocate for children affected by childhood trauma and domestic violence, and for all you do to educate the community about racial injustice and disparities in minority communities. Your perspective is unique because you're transparent and you've used your own traumatic experiences as a tool to help others heal. Despite your experiences with homelessness, neglect, abuse, and abandonment, you figured out how to move onward. And now you're helping others do the same. Thank you, Aisha. Thank you, Onwarders, for listening to this episode of the Onward podcast. I appreciate you. And I would be honored and love it if you could leave a review wherever you listen to the Onward podcast. It helps other people find this podcast. And I know that by publishing these episodes and sharing other stories, that people can hear and see themselves in these stories and realize that they're not alone. And by writing a review, you will help other people find this podcast and help us spread the word. So thank you very much for listening today, and have a great week, Onwarders.